SEGAbits presents SEGA Talk, a podcast talking all things Sega! With your hosts, George and Barry.
Look, it's a giant talking egg. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the master here. So what?
Hello and welcome to SEGA Talk. I'm Barry. With me is my host, George.
Hello, everyone.
And are we dreaming? Because I feel like we're going to be talking about Nights into Dreams. That was the worst segue ever. It's Nights into Dreams this episode on SEGA Talk. It's a 1996 game for the Sega Saturn. You may have heard of that. You remember the Saturn, George?
Yeah, I remember the Sega Saturn, right? It was one of the planets, right, in our solar system.
Yeah, exactly. But Nights into Dreams, it was a little game that released on the Saturn, and it was Sonic Team's basically answer to Sonic the Hedgehog. You know, they didn't give us a Sonic game on the Saturn, they did give us Nights into Dreams, and we're going to talk about that. So let's dive right in. So Sonic Team was working on the concept that would be Nights into Dreams since the development of Sonic the Hedgehog 2. But it didn't actually begin development until after the release of Sonic and Knuckles. So this is not something they threw together last minute. Like Sonic 2, if you can imagine, they're behind closed doors talking about Nights into Dreams. That's kind of crazy.
And you also have to think these teams in this time were really small, so they did a lot of things. If you look back at their history, they did Sonic, they did a trilogy plus Sonic and Knuckles, and then they did Restar. And then now they're working on this at the same time. It's like they had all these ideas, always trying to make new IPs. They didn't want to stick with Sonic, it seemed.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because, Sega, they were pushing the Saturn, and as a kid, I could tell, even I could see around kind of the marketing BS where it was you've got 3D Blast, you've got Sonic Jam, you've got, And I was like, these aren't real Sonic games. Where's my real Sonic game? Meanwhile, Nights into Dreams is there with the Sonic Team logo. And the game was directed by Sonic Team veteran Naoto Oshima, who was basically the character designer before this on all the Sonic games, correct?
Yeah.
And Yuji Naka was the producer and programmer. And then our good friend Takashi Iizuka headed up the game's design. And so you've got three big name Sonic Team players behind this game. And what could go wrong?
Yeah, I think a lot of people would consider these three people the Triforce of Sonic Team, right? A lot of people look at these people fondly.
Yeah. And I mean, nowadays it's just Iizuka, really.
Yeah.
But Oshima, he took on the role of director. He also designed the characters and the world of Nights, so it was really his baby, though I feel like Iizuka also really holds the game close to his heart, and, we saw that in the later years. But Oshima, he wanted the character to resemble an angel that could fly like a bird. How poetic. So, George, our first talking point on this SEGA Talk what are your thoughts in the change of art style coming from Sonic the Hedgehog to Nights into Dreams?
It's actually kind of interesting. They took a totally different approach. I feel like Nights kind of reminds me more of Peter Pan, even though they never called it their influence. It kind of he's wearing little jumpers and tight pants, and and Sonic is a weird oh, look at me, I'm mischievous little smile. Totally different design, I feel. I don't know if I like Nights better design wise. I know a lot of people are probably gonna hate me for this, but I feel like it didn't invoke the feeling that Sonic did. It's more, I guess, I don't even know how to describe it. I don't know. The look is just so strange. When I was a kid and I looked at Nights, I'm like, what is this? What? This guy in really tight purple spandex is not something you think is very marketable.
I mean, we know full well that Sonic the Hedgehog went through a huge design and development process. Everyone from Tom Kalinske and Al Nilsson of Sega of America and, Japanese executives, everyone played a part in shaping Sonic, and it was definitely a process that caused a lot of headaches, a lot of arguments, but in the end it worked out. And I feel like for Knights, there's a lot less, what am I trying to say? Like there aren't that many cooks in the kitchen with Nights into Dreams. I feel, I don't know how much say SEGA of America had and how much executive involvement there was, but it feels, like you said, you didn't latch on to Knights as a kid. And I personally think from a marketing standpoint, that's a mistake on SEGA's part. However, it also kind of feels like the game had less of a executive dictation, you know what I mean? And I feel like you get that from a lot of the Saturn games. They feel like a lot of the teams were allowed to do what they wanted to do.
And sometimes it's not marketable for an audience in America. It's just like they were thinking about Japan and what they would like over there. But here's my thing. Do you think this game would have changed immensely if all these CEOs and people had a say in the game, like what direction they would go?
I think Knights probably would have become more edgy. I mean, you look at some of the stuff coming out of Europe and America at the time. You look at a lot of the, Saturn games like Bug. He was kind of edgy. You look at Bubsy. You look at just about anyone around that era. And Knights seemed very pure. Like you never saw Knights do that little like evil smirk. He never did an evil face. He was always happy and angelic, as Oshima was trying to convey. And also, Knights didn't have much of a personality, really. No,
and it's kind of like your dream persona, that was the whole thing. But it's also, at this time, PlayStation was really launching more adult games. Like, they were doing their whole Twisted Metal and like big, strong, burly men. We were still coming off of the whole 90s, early 90s Image comic book, super buff men craze. And it's kind of weird that Knights is a game that they thought would, sell a Sega Saturn?
Yeah, there definitely was a lot at the time in the mid to late 90s. This kind of, it was almost like an alternative kind of, like smooth jazz was big, Kenny G, it's and Knights is kind of the Kenny G of Sega games. It's like there's really nothing, even the villains, they're not that, evil. I guess, I don't know, just nothing really grabs me, and this isn't a criticism of the game, really. Nothing grabs me as being like edgy or attempting to and that's the funny thing about the commercials, is that they tried to do that, but then when you play the game, you're like, there is absolutely nothing like snarky or edgy. You before we recorded, you mentioned that commercial with the PlayStation being dropped out the window, and they're like, fly plaything, fly, you're not ready. And it's like,
and it was really badly trying to do what L and the guys at Sega did in Sega of America before this, but without much of an edge. Like, the edge just felt soft, like, oh, you're just making a commercial mocking the PlayStation because it can't fly. That makes no sense.
Right, and I mean, Sonic was edgy, whereas Knights wasn't. And so when you make a commercial trying to play that up, but the screens and the character really isn't supporting that, it kind of falls flat. To be honest, I think the commercials would have been a lot better had they played up the dream world and the 3D world and just more gameplay. But let's delve in a little bit into the development of this game. Let's get deep. So while the game's light on story and focuses more on gameplay, the game itself was influenced by the theories of psychoanalysts Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud. And the game was very much about dreaming and REM sleep. And so the story itself revolves around two playable characters known as Elliot Edwards and Clarice Sinclair, what nice names, who are two teens. They look like little kids, but I guess they're kind of teenagers, from Twin Seeds, who both have issues in real life. So Elliot, he's a basketball player who was humiliated on the court, and Clarice is a talented singer who has stage fright. And so when they sleep, they travel to Nightopia, where they are personified as knights and save the dream world. And then, in effect, Knights influences them in their real life and gives them the strength to pursue their ambitions.
Yeah, and that's the story.
Yeah, and so I mean, when you cut out the dream world stuff, it's like it's a girl overcoming stage fright and a kid trying to learn how to be better on the court. You know,
it's very PG, I guess, like very family home movies from the 90s kind of story, you know, like you could do better, you know, Mr. Rogers sort of stuff. And that, you know, that's good, especially considering this is a kids game aimed at kids. What are your thoughts about the story, Barry?
To be honest, I mean, I never really followed the story in the game until later. I got the game in 1998, and I did play it on a mall kiosk at the time it released for maybe 30 minutes, and I was blown away. But the plot itself really didn't grab me until the Archie comics adaptation, actually, which I know there are people who hate the Archie comics adaptation. I like it because Patrick Spaziante did the art, and he's awesome.
I've never read the Archie comics. Can you tell us the story in that one?
Well, it's basically this story. However, they make a lot of really interesting connections. So, for example, the giant bouncing enemy, I think its name's like Puffy or something like that. She is actually a personification or like a dream version of Clarissa's music teacher. And so all of these like nightmares are actually things that affected the kids in real life. And they actually explore how the kids meet, and they explore like this in the cutscenes in the game. There's like this bully that's given Elliot a hard time. He really doesn't get much screen time in the game, but in the comic, he's actually kind of like the Draco Malfoy, you know, of the story. And so I mean, the whole Twin Seeds thing too. They actually expanded on that, and they had a whole backstory to the town. It was pretty cool. The art's a little over the top, but overall, I mean, it's worth checking out if you always thought there was something there to the story of Nights into Dreams, but you wanted a little more to it.
And that's actually what I was going to come to. Like, they're supposed to say, a lot of people say that, oh, it's supposed to be them conquering their, I guess, what they're scared of in real life in this dream world. But I felt like they didn't really connect the dream world with their real life that well. Like you said right now, the bully comes in as a character in the comic books. But in this, they don't really make that connection. Like that, like the bosses should have been kind of related to each of their specific stories and stuff, but they didn't make that connection in the game. And I felt like I didn't even know the story, to be honest with you, until like I read about it later. I like the cutscenes, and I'm like, oh, this girl likes to sing, this guy likes to play basketball. All right, let's play the game now. Yeah. Like I didn't make the connection that they were trying to like. I didn't really make the connection with the story. I don't know why. I guess it was something I wasn't interested at the time. And I guess it's because we grew up at before this generation without much story. There wasn't that much story in games for us. It was all about going right in and playing the game.
Oh no, exactly. And I mean, a lot of the story is in the manual at the time. And if you were a kid like myself who came late to the Saturn and you went to, I think the store was called Game Busters, and they were selling all these Saturn games for like $4 each. So I bought like every fighting game, all these action adventure games. It was just the disc. I never got the manual, so I didn't know the story going into most of these games.
And that's how I actually bought Nights. I actually bought it. There was this place called Jensen Video here. I don't think it was local, but they ran out of business, and they had all their Saturn games for sale. And I was going flipping through them, and I bought it finally because I mean, we were kids. We couldn't afford games. We had to get them cheap. Mm-hmm. So I bought it, and I didn't even read the manual, to be honest with you. I just flipped through it. Yeah. But got right into the game, and I thought I had a good time without the story.
So let's get back into the development of the game. There's actually an interesting story here with Yuji Naka. So Nights into Dreams is considered the first 3D title by Sonic Team, but the game actually didn't start out that way. According to a 1996 interview with Sonic Team's Yuji Naka, and I'll quote, I won't do my Yuji Naka voice because I don't think I've ever done one. He said, "It turned out to be a completely different game from what we first imagined. We initially planned to make a game about a flying character rendered in beautifully drawn 2D sprite art, a side-scroller closer to feel in feel to Sonic. Our team had spent most of its time making Sonic games on the Mega Drive, and to be honest, at the time, we simply didn't know what the Saturn would be able to do 3D of this caliber. So we put our efforts towards making the most visually appealing 2D sprite game we could. As the development went on, however, we gradually came to realize that the Saturn could handle whatever we threw at it. I don't know if I believe that.
I don't believe the ending either, dude.
But how nice of Yuji Naka to say that in 1996 when the Saturn clearly needed people to buy it. But that is interesting. So it started off as a 2D game. What do you think about Sonic Team making the game 3D instead of 2D?
I think it was good in the end because the Sega Saturn needed more 3D games, and I think this is one of the best looking 3D games on the console. Mm-hmm. So if they didn't make it, I think it would have one less game. And you know how Sega of America was with their 2D releases. I don't think it would have been pushed as big as it was. I don't think we would even be talking about them right now as highly as it is. This is like the second tier Sonic Team game. Like, this game comes out all the time. There's always cameoing everywhere. So it wouldn't be as popular if it wasn't for it being 3D and getting a huge marketing budget that it did at the time.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, the game could work as 2D. In fact, it has worked as 2D. There was that unlockable version of NiGHTS on the Game Boy Advance. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do remember that.
And it played, I mean, I thought it played perfectly. It was like totally fine. They totally could have made a 2D version of NiGHTS for the Game Boy Advance. They were remaking all of those Sega games back then. I don't know why they never did a full NiGHTS. But anyway,
I would love to see this game in 2D. I wanted to see what they worked on, how the sprites look. I wanted to see Sonic Team try to make a really nice 2D game on the Sega Saturn, because the Sega Saturn's strong point was that it could do 2D really, really well with nice animation. And I think Sonic Mania is going to be the closest we're going to get, at least to Sonic on Saturn. Mm-hmm. So, but I would like to see how this looked in 2D. I hope we get a leak one day.
Oh, for sure. I mean, especially this would be the team coming off of Sonic and Knuckles. So if you can imagine them pushing 2D gaming even further after that. And, you know, I mean, Yuji Naka, he's being nice in this quote. He said, they realized the Saturn could handle whatever we threw at it. I personally think the Saturn could handle whatever 2D stuff they threw at it, for sure. But 3D, I don't know. Yeah, and so the game, I mean, my opinion, of course, the game should have been 3D. The final game is kind of 2D, though, isn't it? I mean, you think about it, you're on a track, though it does twist and turn around. You have that 3D movement, at least in the 2D plane.
Yeah, it's still 2D, kind of like thought out. You could tell that they designed the game in 2D and then they just made it polygon. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because the reason they didn't want to make it 3D is such a bizarre reason. They said because TVs are flat. What does that mean? Like,
that makes no sense.
Yeah, that makes no sense. In the interview after that, they say, "Oh, the TVs were flat, so we decided that 3D probably wasn't the best course of action." Like, who? What? Why would you say that? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. They're still flat. You're making 3D Sonic games. Who cares?
I do think it's interesting though, because in Nights into Dreams, before you enter the what are those things called? Like an idea palace? I don't remember the lore, but the little cage that Knight's in, you're walking around as the kid, and you do get a taste of 3D in that, because when you run out the clock and you become the kid again, you can run around the map. Yeah. But it's very disorienting. It's definitely not the strong point of the game, but it does make me wonder if this was Sonic Team like testing the waters of 3D, you know?
Yeah, for sure. You could tell it is, but it wasn't well developed at all. Like, no, it was very like you jumped on things. It was slippery. Hills didn't feel nothing felt like you were really walking and felt great. But I think in my opinion, they should have just made it when the time ran out. You woke up and that's it. That's what I would have done, and just kept it flying because I felt like that was the strongest point of the game anyway.
Yeah, like you wake up and then you do a mini game where you're running to the fridge to get more NyQuil or something.
Yeah, of course, sleeping pills.
The kids are self-medicating themselves to go back to sleep.
You got to get the glowing orange bottles.
Yeah, exactly. Moving on. The game's levels are split in half between Claris and Elliot, each getting 3, with both repeating the last stage, giving the game a total of 7 levels. So while the game was super short, even for its day, it did have a lot of replayability thanks to the gameplay design. So the game had a timer allowing you to fly, zipping through loops and collecting orbs. The stage's goal was to collect 20 blue chips and then turn them back in at the starting point.
Actually, it's
and the
cage,
game,
but yeah, you have to go all the way.
Yeah, and I mean, but you would soon learn, because I mean, and I'll get back to what we're talking about here, but you'd soon learn that you'd get all 20 blue chips, you'd rush back to this cage and go da-da-da-da-da-da, and it would be like F.
Yeah,
like,
and that's actually
I did it though.
I wanted to say something about that actually. The Wikipedia article that I got most of the information from, they said that the point of the game is to get a good score, you have to go all the way back as soon as possible, and that's a lie. Like, they didn't even get that right. That's not the point of the game. That's not how you get good scores at all. You have to basically try to go as around the laps like a racing game and memorize the stage and try to get as much score as possible. And then in the last second, the clock running down, try to get to the end, to the start point, and then finish the level, which is kind of hard. I mean, what was your opinion on that and the gameplay of Knights?
When I learned that, it was a game changer for me, because I remember when I first played the game, I would like fail repeatedly, and I was like, this is bullshit. I'm playing the game. I'm doing what you want. You said get the 20 blue chips. I got them. I returned them, and you're giving me a D. It's like if you went to school and they said, all right, you need to answer 20 questions. You get all 20 questions right, and the teacher gives you an F. It's like, what? I did it.
And the only thing that I think they kind of screwed up in is that when you see Sonic Team, you think, oh, I'm going to have the mentality of Sonic. I have to go super fast, get to the end as soon as possible. And that's not what the game is about at all. This is totally different. It's more of a racing game, but trying to beat a timer to get to the goal, like under the timer.
Yeah, and you, like you were saying, you had to learn the track, and so at certain points, you would be on that last like 30 seconds, and you'd have to tell yourself, did it take me 30 seconds to get through it? Because if it didn't, I'm going to have to like get as many chips as I can, like bonus chips, and then rush back to the goal either forwards or backwards, whichever way it's closest. And like, God help you if you get trapped by something, you know?
Yeah. One of the annoying things I think for the game was that, okay, so you're doing the laps, right? And sometimes the little, because you know, where you start off, it's like it looks like a little shrine. I don't even know what it is, like a little garden thing. I don't even know. And if you go in it, you finish the level. So sometimes I would be playing the game going super fast, trying to get, around and around, try to get all the points. And then I accidentally hit the thing. Like, they would place it sometimes in the later levels so you could accidentally go in and finish the level and kind of screw you over, so you got to do it all over again.
Oh yeah, it definitely wasn't out of the way. Like, imagine a game like Daytona USA and you have to drive off the track and go around the checkpoint in order to like succeed.
Pretty much, yeah.
And I think that's my one complaint about the game. I feel like they could have designed it better at that point. So, okay, let's say, for example, you get the 20 blue chips. Instead of acting like you did it, it's time to go back to the goal, they should have said like bonus round. And it would say, this is your current grade if you bring it back right now. And then as you collect additional chips, it would show you like the bonus points you're getting, and then the grade would go upwards,
Yeah, like giving you a sense that you're accomplishing something. Because before, like, you would just, in this game, you would just go around and around and pray that you get an A in it, and then you move on. And then since it was more than one run, each level had like 4 runs, right? So they slightly changed the level around. All right, you screw up a couple of runs to C's, that's it. You're not going to get an A in the whole thing. Because it adds them up in the end, making you replay everything again. Yeah,
and I think a game that did this well was Crazy Taxi. And that's another game where it's kind of like, you go real fast, you gotta, collect the points, and then at the end you get your license. However, unlike Crazy Taxi and Knights, it was like, they told you did it. You did it. You're done. Go back to the cage. Oh wait, you got an F. Whereas with Crazy Taxi, they made it very clear that you need to race out the clock. and do as best you can.
So when you first played this game, did you figure that it was going to be, closer to a racing game? Because it technically is closer to a racing game than a Sonic game. Because it's not like a Sonic game at all. There's no platforming. The only thing that's like Sonic is that you're going fast.
Yeah, that definitely surprised me. I didn't know that there were courses as you went around. So I would go and then I'd be like, oh, I'm going in a circle. That's interesting. And then, of course, like I mentioned, that little surprise where you actually have to keep playing the game down and run the clock down. Of course, that was a surprise to me.
And
I loved it.
It's also totally different than anything else at the time. Like, I think the reason a lot of people were confused and didn't know you had to run the clock down is because I can't think of any game that had gameplay like this at all.
No. Even to this day, I can't think of anything.
So, I mean, Sonic Team did something really unique and they took a risk. Kind of weird, though, to take a risk on the mascot game that's supposed to sell a console. But hey, Sega's Sega, and that's why we love them, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I don't mean to sound down on the game, because now that I know the rules, I love this game. It's one of my favorite Saturn games. One of my favorite Sonic Team games. I mean,
a lot of people, I feel like a lot of people kind of talk down to this game recently because I don't think they understand the gameplay, and it feels very I don't know, like you have to, people want to be their hands held. They just want to get there, get fast, get the score, get the high score, and move on. And they don't want to put in the work to memorize all this and get there as fast as possible and get all the points.
Yeah, it's an interesting note too that with the letter grading, that felt really weird to me at the time. But then Sonic Adventure rolled around, and Sonic Adventure 2, and just about every Sonic game since, letter grades are a huge deal in your score.
Oh yeah, and do you think that this game had influenced that for Sonic Team?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you look at Iizuka, he became a big name player, especially in Sonic Adventure 2. So, and I mean, considering he kind of, this was one of his babies.
Now, okay, now
I definitely think
now
so.
that we're talking about this whole letter grading, do you think that you would want to see something like this in the old Sonic games, like 1, 2, and 3?
I wouldn't mind it. I never felt like I never really knew how good my score was. At the end, outside of I got an extra life. I guess I did pretty well because Sonic games never had the high score screen, did they? No.
No, they just gave you a random number score, I think.
Yeah, but it wasn't like enter your initials on any of the games.
I remember, no.
No, I guess what I'm thinking of is the battery backup games, but those were more just like, here's your personal like how far you've made it in the game. And so I think the letter grades are a really great idea just to make you understand how good your score is. And I think Generations nailed that with the progress bar that they had.
One thing I didn't write in the notes, but I kind of want to discuss a little bit, was the A life on here that supposedly kind of influenced Sonic Adventure's Chow system. What was your thoughts on it? Did you ever mess around with it when you got the game? I never even knew this existed, I'm going to be honest with you, until I saw like a big article on, I think, Knight's fan site. And I was like, wait, what is this? I never even knew this existed. And you could basically make everything good. And there's like this whole like nature thing. Do you remember about this? And did you ever do it?
I didn't know about it initially. And then like you, I heard about it. And I feel like it was one of those gaming urban legends that kids would pass around. They'd say, oh, in Knights, you can actually like kill those little creatures or raise them. And then they affect the music, or they'll sing to you. And I was like, no, you're full of it. Yeah. And then I looked it up, and it turned out to be true. And it wasn't until Christmas Nights that they really had the whole. I think there was like an A life thing where you can actually check up your progress, and so that's what made it a little more engrossing. But yeah, I was floored when I found that out. The fact that they went to that extra effort to put that in the game, they didn't need to at all.
No, they didn't.
They didn't need to, and they did, and that was just amazing to me.
And one reason I never did it was because I never had battery in my Sega Saturn, because back in the day, you would have to have a battery inside to use the onboard memory card. And I was always so cheap. Like, I would get money and I'd be like, all right, I could either buy a memory card or a game. Guess what I was going to buy? Easy. That was the easy choice right there. And
come on, CR 2032, you got to get those.
I know. I know. It's just the hassle of getting one as a kid. I mean, they ran out. So actually, the Saturn didn't run out that fast, but it did run out.
And it was easy to replace them, unlike the Dreamcast. You could actually access them on the Saturn.
Yeah, from the back, little lid.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which everybody loses. Do you, on your Saturn right now that you have the lid on?
I've got the lid. I've also got the VCD card in my Japanese Saturn, so I can enjoy such classics as Dances with Wolves and Beverly Hills Cop. So,
hey, those are classic movies.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the soundtrack, huh? How about that soundtrack?
It's pretty good.
Yeah, the soundtrack is usually highly praised and was composed by Naofumi Hataya, who worked on Golden Axe 2 and Sonic CD prior, Fumi Kumatani, who went on to compose Burning Rangers, Sonic Adventure, and even Sonic Colors, Tomoko Sasaki, who worked on Virtua Racing Deluxe and Rystar. And Tomoko Sasaki is an interesting composer because at this time she was known as the singing voice of Sonic Team since she wrote and sung Dreams Dreams and did some voice work as she is heard during Sonic Team's 1996 jingle. Is that the Sonic Team?
Yeah.
Yeah, which is also in Sonic Adventure.
Yep.
And that's cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's like, it really shows you how small Sonic Team was that they had to use composers for voice work. Like, that wouldn't happen anymore, I don't think. I think video gaming is so big that you have all these, like, people working on different assets of your game, and they put something together. They stitch it all together.
Well, here's a little... I'm going to see if I can catch you out on this. Here's some Knights trivia. See if you can answer this question.
No.
So the Knights... You don't even know? The Knights into Dreams soundtrack has clear ties to this classic movie. Modern classic at the time.
Modern classic at the time. Like, it came out before Knights came out?
Yeah.
Fuck.
And it's kind of weird.
I have no idea. I've never really heard about this.
It's the Knights in a Dream soundtrack. They took several samples from this movie. Do you know it?
No, I don't know it. Do you know it?
Home Alone.
Home Alone, really, dude? Home Alone.
When you go to the options screen, and I don't know why they did this, and they're playing that like do 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 do. Remember that? And then you hear the kids talking and stuff. Those are the kids from Home Alone. Like the family. And when you hear mom, that's Kevin McAllister going through his house looking for his mom.
Is that legal?
I don't know. I don't think so.
It's like they're making a mixtape here. Like, they're sampling voices from movies, and that should be copyrighted, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, Home Alone, that came out in 1990, so we're 6 years later. But I know in this episode of SEGA Talk that we are not going to be doing the movies that came out in 96, because we've already covered that in a past episode for a game that came out in 96. However, I gotta wonder if Home Alone was an influence on them.
I mean, it's funny because a lot of the themes and kind of like the feeling of Home Alone is kind of weird. It's like nostalgia. I don't know. I think it's nostalgia because we watched it back in the day when we were kids, but like there's this whole thing about being a kid that Home Alone invokes, you know, like staying home alone and robbers coming in, but you beating them. This is trying to invoke the same kind of feeling, but with dreams. So I feel like there's some connection.
And I mean, Home Alone definitely had a modern nostalgia to it. I mean, even in the time, they just nailed that like classic Christmas feel. But it's interesting because, you know, with the kids and they're going through their problems with basketball and with singing. In Home Alone, Kevin's main issues were he was afraid of that old guy, the shovel guy, and he was afraid of the furnace. And, well, Kevin McAllister didn't take a nap or anything and Knights helped him. He did kind of face those fears and become a better person for it. And so I have to wonder if when they were talking about like what kind of tone are we trying to hit with these kids, what kind of, you know, story are we trying to tell, I feel like Home Alone was definitely big influence on this game. And I mean, it's at least in the soundtrack, it's evident. And it forever, because I love that track, but it has forever changed the way I listen to the game, because now all I hear is Macaulay Culkin going, "Mom, Mom."
And it's funny because like these kids have these weird problems. Like mine are way more embarrassing. Like if they made a game about my problems, like as a kid, what I was afraid of, it'd be like farting in public and everybody laughing at me. And it's like, can you make a game about that? Really?
Yeah, mine would be taxidermy.
Really? That's what scares you?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of creepy to be honest. Like, yeah, I wouldn't want to touch dead animals either.
So what's your favorite track in the game?
It's kind of a hard question. I think the whole soundtrack really flows well together. I feel like I really like the vocal tracks. Like I know they're cheesy, and I know they're like people look down on them nowadays because they're like, I don't know. I guess I would say they didn't age well, and but I don't know. I love them. I don't know, something about them. I always, even when I bought the game, even though after the whole thing, I played it and I was like, this is fantastic. I like the soundtrack. I don't know. I can't even. It's very whimsical and it really fits with the Knights. I think it's perfect marriage with each other.
Yeah, I agree. All the stage music is fantastic. I loved Soft Museum, I believe it was.
Is that the one where you every time you touch, is that the marshmallow one? The one when you touch the ground, it it warps.
Yeah, I mean, beside the fact that technically Soft Museum had so many cool effects, it had the fake mirrors when you went in, and they basically, I think the trick was that there was another Knights on screen just copying what you were doing, but it looked like a mirror, and they had the soft ground. But going back to the AI, that's where I became aware of it, because the music would change. I would be like, oh, I want to play Soft Museum again. I love that song. And I would play it, and it didn't sound the same. And it was the little Nightopian guys, the way you interacted with them would change the music. Oh, yeah. And it's also kind of like they did this because they had more CD. I mean, they had a CD, they had more memory. So now they could remix songs and redo them, and it's like they really took advantage of that CD space on the Sega Saturn. And the boss themes were really good. I really liked Claus, the cat. It had a lot of like ding, 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 like lots of guitar stuff. Oh, yeah. Just overall, it's a fantastic soundtrack. And even if this was, a Sonic game that Sonic Team were releasing on the Saturn, I think music would have been very important to them. And for sure. I think we talked about this before when we talked about Sonic. Like, Sonic Team could make a really crap game, like gameplay-wise and story-wise or whatever. But their music, like, they always seem to nail it well enough or really well. Like, fantastic. They do really fantastic work on soundtracks. And they pride themselves for sure. So let's talk a little bit about the mascot aspect of this game. So Nights into Dreams was hyped as Sega Saturn's mascot, Knights was. And from Sonic Team, and a lot of people at the time, they were waiting for a follow-up to the highly successful Sonic the Hedgehog trilogy or quadrilogy. But Sonic Team didn't get back to developing a Sonic game until Sonic Adventure on Dreamcast. So the next question is, do you feel that Sonic Team should have worked on a Sonic game as a priority instead of pushing a new franchise? Well, I mean, it depends on who you're asking. Like, if you're asking me as a gamer, probably at the time I probably would have said yeah. And then if I, as a company person, like Sega, I wanted the Sega Saturn to succeed. Yeah. It's like, why would you, like, you have a guaranteed successful franchise, why would you sideline it for something new? To me, that doesn't make any sense, especially when the Sega Saturn was doing terrible in America and Sonic the Hedgehog was literally the biggest mascot in America at the time. I feel like they lost popularity of the Sonic brand during this time. That's why I think they were okay enough to reboot the brand. Like, they gave Sonic Adventure its own look. The music changed. Kind of the direction of the game changed. It was more 3D. I mean, obviously, it wasn't 2D side-scrolling. I felt like if they kept it 2D here, they could, I mean, with polygon forms, I don't know, I think it would have been way more successful than Knights was. Do you think that they could have taken the Knights gameplay concepts and applied it to a Sonic game? It would have been a case basically of what Sonic Team eventually did with games like Unleashed and Lost World, where they would throw some radical new gameplay concept at you. But you think something like Knights would apply well to Sonic?
Yeah, I mean, I think Knights could have been a side game. I feel like maybe they should have canceled Burning Rangers and made this the second game, but focus their first game on the evolution of Sonic. Like, make it a 3D game on this engine. Give it some platforming, the feel of the Sonic Genesis games. And keep the score system they had, give it the A-B score system. And like you said, have a progressive system where they tell you on top, like, if you go now, you'll get this score kind of a thing.
Yeah,
I think it would have been pretty cool. I think a lot of people would have been digging that for sure, and I think it would have sold a lot of Sega Saturns in America.
Oh, for sure.
What are your thoughts on it, though? Do you think they should have done Knights or stuck with Sonic?
I mean, like you, I'm kind of torn. As a fan of the Saturn, as a fan of Sonic, I definitely think they needed a Sonic game. I do like your idea of canceling Burning Rangers. I do love that game, but man, is it like... I just feel like it was kind of a waste of time for Sonic Team. And even now, it's not a game that people go back and play a lot, mainly because they didn't make that many copies of it. But it doesn't feel like it succeeded at all.
I think what they were trying to do, these these flames and everything, it just didn't work out in this generation. Like, I don't think 32, like we talked about this before, like 32-bit 3D kind of aged badly in a lot of senses. There's some games that still look good, but most games did not age good. And I think Knights is one of the ones I still could look back and play and go, hey, this still looks pretty nice. I mean, for its time. But there's a lot of games I look back and I'm like, oh, what is this? What is this? Why do they do this? Yeah. And how did I play this when I was growing up? But I don't know. I feel like Burning Rangers would have been better on the Dreamcast.
For sure. They should have... I don't think they should have killed Burning Rangers. I think they should have postponed it. For sure.
Yes.
Yeah. And just expand Sonic Team. Like, add some new members to it so that they can release Sonic Adventure, Phantasy Star Online, Choo Choo Rocket, Samba de Amigo. Oh my god, were they busy.
Yeah, they were busy, and it's crazy how much games and how small of a team they were. Like, yeah, it's ridiculous. And I can't believe they did, like, quality work back then still. Like, I don't know. Like, they were just pumping out hits.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, behind the scenes, it wasn't always the same people, but they shared staff members for sure. And of course, the higher-ups were the same. Let's talk a little bit about the controller, I should say. So, Nights into Dreams launched with an optional 3D controller that even came in a bundle. And the team referred to the controller as the Spielberg controller, because Steven Spielberg was the first person to play the game well in development with the 3D controller. The team decided that they would need a brand new controller for the game due to the Saturn's original controller being suited for 2D games. And so, what are your thoughts on the Sega Saturn 3D controller, and do you feel it did its job?
I first played the game with the Sega Saturn pad for years, and then when eBay was getting really popular, like in the early 2000s, I decided I really want to try it with a 3D controller, so I purchased it for like a couple bucks. I know it's crazy now at these, but I played it with it and I felt, it was way better. I always felt like when I played Nights on the Sega Saturn with the D-pad, my finger hurt really bad. Like, I don't know, like I guess pressing down the D-pad and moving around and doing the circle, it really, really, really makes your finger hurt. So, I would say that 3D pad is recommended, especially once you get older, because you don't have that bone stamina like you do when you're younger.
Yeah, I remember it being very strange, mainly because I played it with the 2D pad, and then I got my Saturn, I had my Saturn, the Dreamcast came out, I played with the Dreamcast controller. I was one of the rare people that was not weirded out by the Dreamcast controller at all, mainly because I was coming off of the Genesis, so I was just like, well, of course, 3D controllers look different because it's a 3D game. And then I went back and I got the Saturn 3D controller, and the first thing that hit me was how it was basically a Dreamcast controller.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. And the second thing that hit me was how weird the 3D control stick was. Not in a negative way, but I have not seen a controller since do what that did. Just the way it moved, it was so weird. It was like an eyeball that you were like gouging and then moving around in the socket. You know?
Do you prefer the Dreamcast controller or the 3D Sega Saturn controller design?
I wouldn't have minded if the Dreamcast controller had that pad like that. That would have been interesting. It's
weird. It's like, I don't want to get too much into this, but like the Dreamcast controller now, like when I came out, I didn't have any problem with the Dreamcast controller. I played it. I did have problems with it for fighting games. It was very inferior to the Sega Saturn original pad, but I mean, they had a really good arcade joystick if you could afford it at the time. But I didn't have any problems with it. But now that I feel it, I feel like it feels cheap, right? And I think that the 3D Saturn pad feels higher quality parts, but that's just probably me.
I think the triggers were better.
Yeah, I think that's what it is, the triggers.
Yeah.
They probably did it to save money. I don't remember how much the Dreamcast controllers cost when they came out. I'm assuming they were like $20 to $30. That probably has something to do with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cheap pads. So when the game released, it was received well by critics. Computer and Video Games said it was the perfect evolution of a Sonic game. GamePro praised the 3D controller, and Entertainment Weekly, wow, I didn't know they reviewed games back then, said it's a more compelling sensation of soaring than most flight simulators. However, the game did get some negative comments at the time, one for the limited levels, which was 7 total, compared to Super Mario 64. Oh, boo-hoo. IGN believed that the Sega Saturn console wasn't built to handle NiGHTS due to in-game clipping and warping, but came to the conclusion that the game was pretty damn good, or pretty darn good, and then they were probably talking about booth babes for the rest of the article.
So, what is your thoughts on these comments? Like, do you feel like these are warranted? Especially the warping and clipping, considering this is kind of an issue with a lot of PlayStation 1 games. Like, I went back and played Metal Gear Solid 1. That game has a lot of warping and clipping too. But yeah. I'm pretty sure they didn't mention that in the review.
Nah, I really wasn't bothered by that in the game. And I think the levels thing is kind of unfair just because it's 7 total levels. However, each one has, 3 courses, correct?
Something like that. I think 3, yeah.
3 or 4. And then there's like set pieces, and you got to imagine if you're going to make a Sonic Team, they're making their first 3D game. They build 7 worlds, and then on top of that, they create multiple paths to go through these worlds, and then on top of that, they build all these set pieces, and it all needs to work. I think that's pretty damn amazing, and no hate on Super Mario 64, but let's be honest, guys. It's just like, I feel like it's a lot easier to lay out a Super Mario 64 level than it is a NiGHTS one. Like, a NiGHTS game is like a plate of spaghetti, whereas Super Mario 64 is like a lasagna. It's just like flat with layers.
And this is also an issue that Sonic Team had with Sonic the Hedgehog. I felt like a lot of people complained that the Sonic the Hedgehog original games had less levels than Mario games like Super Mario World. But Super Mario World used the same assets, and I felt like a lot of the levels were throwaway levels. You had like some really challenging levels, but I felt like a lot of them I would just breeze through, and they were just there to fill the content and make the package feel like it was bigger than it really was. And
for sure.
Sonic Team, on the other hand, had limited amount of levels, but really well-designed levels. So it's like a potato kind of a thing.
Yeah, and I mean, in the end, if you are enjoying the game, and if you feel like you want to come back and play it again and again, I don't think that 7 total levels is an issue.
I when I first played it, I kind of felt it was an issue, but that was before I understood how the game played. But after I learned, I was okay with it. I felt like there was a lot of content there.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. When you play the game wrong, you race through each stage in minutes, but then you're like, wait, why didn't the last stage open up? Oh, because I need to get better scores. So, in summation, on Nights into Dreams, do you feel that the game holds up today?
Yes, I feel like it's one of the few Sega Saturn games that hold up today. There's not that many 3D Sega Saturn games that hold up today, and I feel like this is one of them. This is one of the games where I could, if anybody asked me, what's the Sega Saturn all about? I'd probably put this game on because the controls are still smooth, I feel. The graphics are fine enough. I know they're 32-bit, I mean, they're Sega Saturn graphics. But this is one of the best looking Sega Saturn games. This and Virtua Fighter 2, I think, are the two best 3D games on the console. Do you think it holds up today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we're just talking the Saturn original, I think it is still a very approachable game despite the drawbacks of the Saturn technically. I also think that, as we mentioned, if you go into it knowing the rules, you're going to have a very fun time, and I feel like people... I assume that people, are a little smarter now. At least they have the internet and they have wonderful podcasts like SEGA Talk telling them how to play games correctly instead of, doing what you did as a kid where you were like, you push the buttons, this isn't working, this game sucks.
Yeah.
Do you want to, let's talk about very quickly how people can play this game. So, of course, there's the Saturn. It also saw re-release on PlayStation 2, correct?
Yeah, it's a Sega Ages title.
In Japan.
Yeah.
What else can they find it on?
PSN, Xbox Live Arcade, PC Steam release. They re-released the PS2 remake, which has supposedly the original Saturn version in it and Christmas Nights. Mm-hmm. But the issue is that I feel like the Sega Saturn one in it is still smoothed out, the graphics, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not like the original look of the Saturn, which is kind of disappointing because I kind of like the rough look of the Saturn, but maybe not everybody's like me.
And I remember some people complaining that it didn't feel as fluid. The PS2 version, I believe, it like snapped to a directional thing instead of being fully 3D feeling.
Yeah.
But the re-releases later fixed that, from what I remember. So you have no excuse not to play this game.
Yeah, pretty much at this time. I mean, I wouldn't mind a re-release on the PS4. Maybe make the NiGHTS game. I don't know if it's Xbox One compatible. I'm not sure about that. I don't think it is. But it's worth picking up on PSN and Xbox Live Arcade or Steam if you guys have those consoles.
Now, wait a minute. I hear someone on the rooftop. Could it be? It's Santa. Oh. That was my segue into the fact that the Christmas season is upon us, and so George and I thought it would be fun to also quickly cover Christmas nights on this special episode, mainly because I don't think we can stretch Christmas nights out to a 40-minute show. So let's talk a little bit about that. Christmas night. What was it? What is it? Can I play it? Is it good? So this was a freebie given away by Sega and Sonic Team, and it's don't be confused. It's not a demo. It is a demo and it isn't a demo. It's probably the best demo that isn't a demo ever made. It's a stripped down small version of Nights into Dreams. You only get one level, which is Spring Valley, which is almost identical to the level seen in the regular Nights. However, unlike the original, you can play as Elliot as well as Claris, so that's interesting. And when you play as Elliot, the stage is mirrored. Christmas Nights, the game itself, it's Christmas themed, and so the graphics and musics were replaced with winter versions of the original stage. For example, the ideas are now giant Christmas trees. Nights wears a different costume, and the gameplay is largely identical. And the A-Life system's there. And it
also had like a different cutscene. Like, it wasn't CGI, it was hand-drawing cutscenes. And it had its own story that has to do with Christmas. And I think the two characters meet in this one, I'm pretty sure. They bump into each other.
Yeah, I feel like it's almost a quasi-sequel because I feel like this is coming after Nights into Dreams as sort of an epilogue where they meet in the waking world. And they have to find, I believe, a star for the Christmas tree, which is, very difficult to do. I had to go to like Walmart or whatever.
I just ordered mine on Amazon. It's really hard. Should make a game about it.
But what's really interesting about this is that the game makes use of the internal clock, and so throughout any of the non-winter months, Christmas Nights just is called Nights Limited Edition, and it's a demo. But between November and January, the game becomes Winter Nights, and then during December, it's Christmas Nights. So that's pretty cool, but obviously you can control the clock, and I don't think any kid was like, man, it's July, I gotta play Nights Limited Edition, I gotta wait till November.
No, we smarted up about that for sure.
Yeah. There were tons of features too, which is pretty cool. So you could change the clock to special times. So for example, what am I thinking of? New Year's Day, there is a title change on the main screen. On Valentine's Day, hearts fall during the stage. On April Fool's Day, you play as the enemy Rila, who we haven't mentioned, but he's basically the shadow to Knights, which is kind of funny because Rila basically is a precursor to Shadow when you think about it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Even in colors, in the colors of his costume. But yeah, there were also unlockables. George, what were some of your favorite unlockables?
None of them.
Thanks for listening. No.
Thank you. The show's over. I don't know. Like, I never really played Christmas Nights. Like I told you, I got it way later on, and I never really had a chance to sit down and play the game. See, to me, I always thought it was just the same thing, and I'm like, oh, cool, Christmas theme. I ran around the track, and I'm like, cool. And wasn't the unlockables like art and stuff like that?
Yeah, what you did was you would unlock the chance to play a matching game. So you would, I believe, win certain chances to flip cards over, match them, and then get prizes. And so some of the prizes were like a time attack or a link attack, a music box, a museum that housed, all the art you were talking about, a karaoke feature, which is kind of funny.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Karaoke. Videos, there was the Tokyo Game Show debut footage. There was, interestingly, there was like a merchandise page, which, like, I've never seen Knights merchandise in person. But what I thought was really cool is the NiGHTopian collection, which, as mentioned earlier, was the ability to see your AI and how it's doing and what eggs there are and what characters have hatched and how happy they are. So that was really cool. And then a certain blue hedgehog made his way into the game too. Who?
I think I know. Sonic the Hedgehog?
Nah. Yeah, no. You're right. So I think the coolest thing, especially for Sonic fans, was the fact that Christmas Nights had an unlockable Sonic the Hedgehog. And so the game would become Sonic the Hedgehog into Dreams, and the player could only run around on foot. And you remember, again, earlier in the podcast, George and I weren't that ecstatic about the free running.
No.
So it's not the most fun, but it's cool to control a 3D Sonic. Do you remember the boss battle, at least?
Off the top of my head? No,
Yeah.
I don't remember the boss battle. It might have not made an impact on me. Can you refresh my memory?
It's Puffy, the giant, the big round lady,
Okay,
but it's turned into Dr. Eggman. Yeah.
Okay, because I was thinking that there might have been like a special boss. I didn't know if there was like, maybe Eggman is actually in the thing and I missed it. No, but yeah, I remember Puffy as the Eggman, yes.
Yeah, and the music's actually a mashup of the Puffy theme and then Final Fever from the Japanese version of Sonic CD. So at the time, I didn't make that connection because obviously the Japanese soundtrack didn't make its way to the West. But that's pretty cool. And I guess a little piece of trivia is that qualified as Sonic's first true 3D outing because Sonic Jam, Sonic R, and Sonic 3D all released in '97.
So do you feel like a lot of these options they put in this game were kind of thought up for the original release, but they never had a chance to put it in? Like the improvements to the A-Life and unlocking all these things. Do you think it would have improved the overall package in the original game if they would just include it in it?
I think the NiGHTopian collection should have been included. I mean, as mentioned, I believe it reads your original file. So this is almost the closest we have ever gotten to a bonus disc for a game, like the extras.
It's like, I feel like this is something that they expanded on in Sonic Adventure, like where you could download Christmas themed stuff in the Dreamcast.
Yeah.
And it was like they couldn't have that technology at this time, so they decided to just put out a disc. And I kind of felt like Christmas Nights was inside of the original Nights, and then whenever Christmas came around, the game just changed. That would have been more interesting, I think, for kids at the time, because more people probably own the original Nights than Christmas Nights.
Yeah, and I mean, they kind of rectified that because the later re-releases, the PS3 and Xbox 360 and Steam release, includes Christmas Nights. So, you know, you don't need to go out and hunt around on eBay for this. You get it with the new release. But the initial release was interesting because Christmas Nights, it was not sold in stores. I mean, it was and it wasn't. So basically, the disc was bundled with issue 14 of UK's Sega Saturn magazine. And that's the first time, I believe, that it made its way out there, and then it saw limited distribution across the rest of the world. So in Japan, it was given away in a console bundle, and it was not sold separately. However, it did have a plastic jewel case that matched the Saturn library. So that's kind of cool. And then in North America, the game was actually given away with the purchase of select Saturn games like Daytona USA, Championship Circuit Edition. And these versions were given away in a cardboard slipcase to cut costs, which is kind of a shame. But then again, I can't imagine them giving it away in what were the Saturn cases, those giant, bulky pieces of crap.
In America, like, that's such a mistake. Like, those things, you just look at them wrong. Like, if you stare at your Sega Saturn cases in the US, like, the hinges break. I'm like, what the hell, dude?
I know.
I just looked at you.
I moved, and I'm afraid to open that Saturn box. It's just going to be like confetti. And interestingly, the game was also available to rent at Blockbuster Video in America. I don't remember that personally, but I can imagine had I rented it, I would have quote-unquote lost it. Because if that was one of the only ways to get the game, of course you'd be like, oh, Dad, I lost it. Can we pay the... Like, what would you pay? Because they can't replace it. It's not like you're, like, giving it a price. It's
almost,
free.
It's almost like they should have just, like, given it away at Sega Saturn retailers. But, you know, Sega Saturn, I mean, at Blockbuster retail stores, like, oh, come in, rent a game, and then you get the game. Rent a Sega Saturn game and get Christmas Night for free. That's what it should have been. It's whatever, I guess.
That would have been smart.
Yeah, that would have been smart to get new people in your store to rent Sega Saturn games, and they get to give out their copy of the game, I guess, or demo, or whatever it is. It's like an expansion pack, really.
And so that I mean, you know, it's I would deem Christmas Nights as a separate release, a separate game, because it builds off the original. It uses your original save file, but it also is standalone. But it's just interesting what a strange release history that had. And I think the only game that would probably come close from Sonic Team later on was Choo Choo Rocket, which had some pretty strange release strategies in other parts of the world.
When did you get Christmas Nights and add it to your collection?
I got it pretty early on. I think I bought it when I bought my Saturn.
Okay, yeah, so, it's because I only had Nights for the longest time, and I didn't even know this existed until, like, I got a computer, and I started researching more and looking at, like, oh, wait, there was one that was themed as Christmas, and of course, at that time, I'm like, gotta have it, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it was easy back then to get Sega Saturn games. Not all the games were easy to get back then, but most of the games that are considered really rare right now were pretty easy to get back then. And it's a shame that they're so rare now, because almost every Sega Saturn game that was released in the United States is considered rare now. It's ridiculous, but yeah. This is definitely worth picking up. And if you don't have a Sega Saturn or want to spend, I don't know how much it's going to cost you to get both. How much are they going for right now?
If you want to check, we've never done this on the show, but I think this would be interesting.
Yeah, give it a check.
So let's see. Christmas Nights, and this is a live eBay search.
Ooh, live eBay search. They also have it on PSN. I think it's $15.
Holy sh!
How much is it? It's ridiculous, isn't it?
They want like $55, $75.
I got it for like a couple of bucks, dude. And
I
like,
got
barely
it for a couple bucks too. Let's see. So 75. I mean, okay. Let's remember, if you're not an avid eBayer, always remember that the buy it now cost is not the going rate. These are crazy people who want to make that amount of money. You got to look for auctions that are just auctions. So let's weed those out. So this one's a 0 bids, $55 starting price. The Japanese version is actually very cheap. I'm seeing it for 99 cents, $1.99.
You don't need to know. You could just get in Japanese, to be honest, if you guys are really looking forward to it. If not, there's always the PSN re-releases, and they're worth buying anyway. Anything you want to tell them?
You can get Nights into Dreams for a lot cheaper than Christmas Nights, that's for sure. But as I've said in just about every episode of SEGA Talk, save for Sonic 06, unfortunately, this is a game you definitely need to catch and play and everything. It's so good. It's such a good game.
And if you guys like this podcast, give us a positive rating on iTunes. We're also on Stitcher Radio, and we have an RSS feed on our site, SEGAbits.com. Merry Christmas, enjoy your guys' holidays, and play some Christmas nights.
Now let's open some Twitter presents and finish the show as we do, at least in the past few episodes, by reading people's recollections and memories of Nights into Dreams as the music plays. So Cory Maru, who's actually a SEGAbits writer, says, basically the development concept that Azuka-san put into the game where it focuses on a person's dreams based on personal issues. So these are their favorite things. We have Since Species. That's a name. It says, it's such a free-spirited, kind-hearted game with no negative vibes at all. It's a feel-good game, and that definitely echoes our initial thoughts where we couldn't find any edginess to this game at all. Viper XMNS says, the speedy, free-flying gameplay, awesome soundtrack, character design, environments, and high skill play. Will we agree? Troy Evans Monroe just says, short.
Very short comment.
I guess he likes short games. I don't disagree. I don't have much time to play games, so I love them short. And then finally, 8bit_Abel says that Nights is really a special game. I even dreamed about it once.
I guess it's time for us to go to bed today, right? And dream about Nights.
Yeah, all right. Well, good night, George. Good night to our listeners. Thanks for listening.
In a dream I could see you are not far away. Anytime, any place, I can see your face. You're that special one that I've been waiting for. And I hope you're looking for someone like me. In my dreams, I can hear you calling me in the night. Everything is so sweet in your eyes. I feel there's so much inside. Oh yeah. In the night, dream delight, I want to see you standing there. In the night, dream delight, I found someone who really cares. a dream we can do everything we want to. There's nowhere I'd rather be but here with you. The stars above light the way only for you and I'm so glad I found the one I've been looking for. Keep the dream of the one you're hoping for. Love can come through an open door. Just be strong, and you're sure to find the one. Find the one in the night. In delight, I want to see you standing there in the night. Dream delight, I found someone who really cares. In the night, dream delight, I want to see you smile again. In the night, dream delight, you are the one I've waited for.